A few hours later, Luang and Harold went to the conference room of the base. Our boy was sitting and browsing his mobile phone, while on the other side, Harold was standing next to him. Luang made a video call with his sister, King. She started showing 2 fingers, closed her eyes, and with a kind smile, mentioned that she hoped to see him again soon. She promised that he was going to be greatly surprised since she had almost finished muscle and bone training and would soon ascend to level 4. Luang began observing his sister, and his eyes widened with joy. With a proud smile, he said that he knew how incredible his little sister was. He asked her to give the phone to their parents, since he wanted to talk to them. King nodded and handed the mobile phone to her father. Upon seeing Luang, the mother's eyes filled with tears and happiness. With a worried smile, she admitted that she was somewhat concerned about him. She was happy to see that he was doing well and asked him to finish his mission quickly and return to them, as everyone missed him. The father, who was behind her, closed his eyes and began to smile. Luang remained silent, watching his parents. His eyes started to shine, and with a smile he promised to return as soon as possible, asking them to take care of themselves. After talking with them, Luang ended the video call and remained looking at the phone screen in silence. Marshal St. Harold, who was standing beside him, widened his eyes in confusion. His attention was fixed on Luang's mobile phone, and he began to sweat, not knowing what was happening. He started staring at Luang with a curious gaze and realized that the supposed god had parents who were no more than 50 years old, and his younger sister was not yet of age. He did not know how old this god really was. With a smile, Luang continued browsing his mobile phone. The jaw of poor Marshal St. Harold dropped, and his eyes expanded in fear. He simply could not believe it. Luang was precisely a young man whose age did not even reach that of his great-great-grandson. Just a few hours ago, our boy had instantly and effortlessly killed 2 level 9 martial saints, directly eliminating the leaders of 2 major mysterious organizations in the world. His eyes widened in surprise, and he couldn't help but sweat profusely. He knew that if he spread this news, no one would believe him. He used to mock the new rumors about the martial saint of the Dragon Kingdom. Realizing that Luang was the new martial saint, he began to imagine Luang with his hands in his pants pockets, smiling and surrounded by an intense martial energy. He had killed 3 martial saints. A question came to Harold's mind. He didn't know how many more level 9 warriors existed in this world. For him, this was terrifying. While Harold was lost in his thoughts, Luang was on a video call with his friends. With a cheerful expression, he started pointing at Harold with his finger and decided to say goodbye to them, since there were still people waiting for him to discuss matters. Upon hearing this, Harold came out of his trance, and his eyes filled with surprise and confusion. He could not believe that someone as strong as Luang really existed in this world. Luang put the mobile phone in front of Harold and focused on his face. He closed his eyes, and with a nervous smile began to wave at Luang's friends. Luang turned off the mobile phone and placed it on the table. Then he turned to Harold, his eyes filled with gratitude. He began to observe Harold, and with a smile, thanked him. Harold lowered his head before Luang and mentioned that it was an honor for him to serve. Luang took out the sample of energy crystal that he had in his pocket and began to observe it with a curious expression. He decided that it was time to talk about their matter. He asked if Harold knew what this thing was. The energy crystal began to shine intensely. Harold's attention fixed on it, and his eyes widened in surprise. He began to sweat and ponder in silence. He placed his hand over his chest, closed his eyes again, lowered his head before Luang, and with a sincere expression, asked how many energy crystals Luang needed. Upon hearing this, Luang turned to him and, with a curious gaze, asked how many energy crystals Harold could obtain. Harold's eyes began to shine with seriousness, and in a sincere tone, he hesitated for a second until he revealed that he could obtain 1 charge of energy crystals. Upon hearing this, an excited smile spread across Lu Sheng's face, and his eyes began to shine with joy. Originally, he had only asked out of pure curiosity and did not expect Harold to think he was extorting him. He was happy because he had managed to obtain many resources from Harold and his organization. Lee's body began to emit orange martial energy. His attention fixed on Harold, and he couldn't help but smile. A few grams of energy crystals could make his immortal cells progress by leaps and bounds. With a kilogram, he feared it would be more than enough to reach the true limit of his level 8 stellar body. While Harold had his head lowered, Luang placed his hand under his chin and began to ponder. A question came to his mind. He didn't know if he looked like someone so terrifying that Harold thought he was a villain. Luang snapped out of his trance, turned to Harold, and with a cheerful smile, mentioned that it seemed like he had many energy crystals. Harold raised his head, his eyes widened in surprise, and his jaw dropped, revealing that he actually did not have many energy crystals. In these 100 years, he had only accumulated a few hundred grams. But since Luang had killed the leaders of Dark Star and the Black Magic Society, if he took over their territories, he would be able to gather a kilogram of energy crystals. With a curious expression, Luang asked if the production of energy crystals was really so scarce. Harold's expression changed, and his eyes filled with seriousness. He extended his hand and explained that although finding energy crystal deposits was rare, there was no shortage. He began to imagine a man with 3 eyes with a gaze full of fear. Harold mentioned that every time energy crystals were produced, the 9th part had to be given to the guides, and only 10 of what was produced was distributed among all the martial saints of the world. Upon hearing this, Luang became curious. He started staring at Harold and asked who the guides were. His eyes widened in fear and seriousness. He began to sweat, not knowing if the guides were the deity that had appeared in his battle against Exio Jaya. Harold extended his hands, approached Luang, and with a sincere expression mentioned that it seemed Luang should not know this, and also that the guides had probably not yet had time to contact Luang. Luang began to observe Harold and listen attentively in silence. Harold started to imagine a group of men wearing masks and revealed that the job of the guides was to register the number of level 9 martial saints and along the way collect energy crystals. He had discovered this secret in his 7th year as a marshal. With a calm gaze, Luang interrupted him by giving him the order to get to the point. Harold extended his hand and began to imagine a powerful hooded deity. His eyes started to shine seriously as he explained that the guides were powerful martial artists from planets with advanced civilizations, possessing power far greater than that of a level 9 warrior. No one knew if they were level 10 or even higher. They had appeared since the beginning of the martial path, leading the rise of martial arts. When, on Blue Star, level 9 martial saints emerged, the guides descended to establish a new world order, organizing the warriors of each nation and collecting energy crystals together. The guides never intervened in conflicts between nations, except when too many level 9 martial saints fell. Only then would they descend to impose punishments. Luang remained calm and, with a curious gaze, asked if the guides were going to intervene if 3 martial saints died. Harold's eyes began to shine. He started staring at Luang and replied, "No," since the last time the guides intervened was in the battle between the Dragon Kingdom and Lion, with more than 10 martial saints dead and injured. In fact, the supervision of the guides over them was quite lax. They only cared about 3 things. The first was the issue of energy crystal production. If production decreased, the guides would get angry, and in severe cases, the martial saints had to pay out of their own pockets to meet the quota. The second was the invasion of exotic beasts. They had to suppress beast invasions below a safe threshold. If disturbances greater than expected occurred, the martial saints were obligated to intervene to repel the beasts. Harold's eyes widened in fear, making him sweat. He approached Luang and revealed that without the permission of the guides, the appearance of a martial arts expert of level 9 or higher was not allowed on Blue Star. They assumed that this was established to facilitate resource collection for the guides, revealing that their planet was called a first-level resource star. Luang crossed his arms and began to gaze at the ground in silence. His eyes started to shine with hatred, as this coincided with what he had seen in the dream space. He began to imagine a powerful deity controlling the world. Without level 10 martial artists, the limit of local martial power was maintained. An advanced civilization led the martial development of the indigenous civilization, facing invasions from exotic beasts, while collecting rare and valuable resources from the planet, all while restricting the birth of strong warriors. The gaze of our boy fixed on Harold with a serious expression. He asked what they should do when a warrior capable of surpassing level 9 was born. Harold froze, thinking in silence. His eyes widened in surprise, and with an uncertain expression, he said that he did not know. With a serious expression, he explained that the path to ascend beyond level 9 was in the hands of the guides. Without help, there was no way to break that limit. Luang put his hand under his chin, closed his eyes, and began to think in silence. Then, his eyes started to shine with determination, and he asked when the guides were coming next time. With an uncertain expression, Harold looked away and explained that the guides were going to arrive in a few months. But he was not sure about the details. Each time, they were received by a representative of the martial saints from the World Martial Arts Association. But it was certain that they always came after the collection of energy crystals. At the World Masters Congress, Luang started to gaze at the ground with a confused expression and asked if the World Masters Conference had been created for the purpose of collecting energy crystals and distributing quotas. Harold began to look down at the ground in silence. With a sincere gaze, he replied yes, explaining that any warrior who had the level of martial saint could attend. The Dark Star and Black Magic Society only wanted more shares, and for this reason, they had joined forces to attack Harold. After all, if there was one less person sharing the cake, the others could eat a little more. Luang's eyes filled with tranquility. He turned to Harold and asked if many martial saints attended. With a serene gaze, Harold began to imagine the powerful martial saints and revealed that it could be said that all the martial saints who could attend would be present. Luang rested his hand on the table and stood up with an excited smile. He asked if he could accompany Harold when the time came. Harold began to observe Luang in silence until he placed his hand on his chest. His eyes widened with joy, and with a smile he mentioned that it would be an honor for him. He couldn't believe that someone as powerful as Luang wanted to attend and support his association, realizing that this time the distribution quota for his association was going to be higher than ever. Luang turned toward him and, with a smile, decided not to take Harold's savings. He only asked to be given Dark Star and Black Magic Society's share. He also asked him to take good care of Nippon for him and not shatter his sweet illusion, since Luang still had a few more wishes left to grant him. Harold joined his hands in joy and, with a smile, accepted. Luang turned his back and slowly began to walk away, deciding that it was time to leave. Harold panicked, reached out to him, and with a curious gaze asked what his current strength level was. Luang kept walking until he stopped, turned his head, and, while his eyes were shining, smiled and replied that he was a level 8 warrior. Harold closed his eyes and sighed, thinking Luang was a level 10 warrior. But then his jaw dropped, and he transformed into Yop from One Piece upon seeing that Luang was a level 8 warrior.